George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Welcome to the special Jubilee edition, only kidding, of the mother of all talk shows. Nonetheless, I hope you all enjoyed your Jubilee long weekend. I enjoyed mine. I spent much of it standing behind a table in a park selling my wife's new Indo foods. Well, you need to make a living somehow. We'll be talking about almost everything under the sun. We'll be talking war, famine, pestilence, and disease, but we'll also be talking Meghan and Harry. Should they abdicate? Or would it be better if they were reigning over us after the passing of Her Majesty Long Life to her? Of course, I don't fancy Charles and Camilla, do you? And we'll be talking about Joe Biden, so it could be worse than Charles and Camilla. You could actually have an executive head of state that isn't fit to be sent out for a loaf. His latest ravings, haverings, slaverings will be religiously examined here on the mother of all talk shows. No point in talking about Putin because he's already dead and they're using body doubles. I'm sure you've read. Well, when you think of all the grievous illnesses he's suffered in just the last 100 days, heart attacks, strokes, dementia, all kinds, it's a wonder that he hasn't replaced himself with a body double before now. We'll be talking about the grave situation in the Middle East. It's been grave almost all of my life, but it's grave and getting graver, and maybe a lot of people are heading for a fresh grave as a result of the instability unleashed over the illegal settlers' invasion of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. We'll be talking Pakistan, we'll be talking Indonesia, we'll be talking all corners of the world, if the world had corners. That's my Orientalism showing through again. We'll be talking about Australia, down under. But is it really down under? It's about time I cut to the chase. Fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Look, staying in any job for 70 years is an achievement, and when that job is head of state and you become the longest serving head of state, certainly in the history of these islands, and I suspect perhaps the world, I don't know of another ruler, if we can use that word, that has been in power for 70 years. But in any case, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, happy Jubilee, and that's the last I'll say on it. I have no intention of raining on anybody's parade. I don't believe in micturating on other people's cherished traditions and their deepest held beliefs, even where, as in this case, I don't share them. I am, of course, a Republican. I don't want an executive president, so hold back we might get President Blair or we might get President David Cameron or all of that. I don't even necessarily need an election for a president. We can indirectly elect someone who's never been in politics before, whose only job is to look benign in a review parade, shake hands with visiting dignitaries, throw dinners, and sign off on legislation. Come to think of it, it's not a bad job. Nice work if you can get it. I'm not talking about a switch from the monarchy to an executive presidency like they've got in, for example, France or the United States. I made the point the other day, let me make it again now for our American viewers in particular, but also our international viewers of a liberal bent. If I was an American, I wouldn't give up my weapons either at the behest of Joe Biden, a corrupt tyrant in a country where there are already 500 million guns in circulation, a country which is the most unequal country on the earth with all that that entails, a country with a history of genocide, of slavery, and of civil war. I wouldn't give my weapons up to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and neither should you, good citizens of the United States. There are many other things that will have to be done to control the mass shootings that are happening not just every day, but several times a day in the United States. But trying to disarm 350 million people and 500 million guns is a fool's errand if ever I heard of one. And we'll be talking, of course, about the war. The war drags on. I spoke yesterday at a webinar hosted by the Galway anti-war movement, a fine organization on the west of Ireland with which I've been associated for many decades through my good friend Niall Farrell and his good wife Jenny and many other friends in Galway. I was sharing a platform with Professor Noam Chomsky and I think the veteran journalist and filmmaker John Pilger and the wonderful Claire Daly and Mick Wallace, both members of the European Parliament from Ireland. I didn't actually see the latter three on screen. I'm taking it as read that they appeared as advertised. But if you want to go and look at the footage from that webinar with such illustrious and multiply elected politicians on it, up comes a warning from Twitter that this links to a Russian state media affiliate. I've got to tell you, Twitter, I'm losing whatever remaining patience I had with you. I'm already suing you in the courts. But I am minded now, at this latest outrage of yours, to organize a class action on behalf of everyone who has been wronged by you and your failure to live up to the much trumpeted role you gave yourself as the keeper of the public square. It's not just that Noam Chomsky, Claire Daly and me, and John Pilger, a man that was writing front page exposés and making award-winning television programs when the skinny jeans and sneakers, man bun, man handbag carriers at Twitter were not even born, should be dubbed as Russian state-affiliated media. It's that Sahur Saxo, Sarah Abdullah, with 200,000 followers, scrubbed from Twitter just like that. It's that my friend Danny Haifong in the United States, for daring to question the prevailing narrative over Tiananmen Square, is wiped off Twitter this day, unless, like a pistol pointed at his head. He agrees to delete a tweet that he, in all conscience, believes in. Who are you to tell people to delete their sincerely held views? Who are you, by the way? I'll tell you who you are until Elon Musk takes over. You're the royal family of Saudi Arabia, principal shareholder. Do you think we're going to tolerate the royal family of Saudi Arabia deciding what views can be written and published and which views cannot? Do you think we will go with equanimity into that good night? Do you think we'll allow the royal family of Saudi Arabia to brand Noam Chomsky as Russian state-affiliated media? Do you? Because you've got another think coming. Because you see the actions that you are increasingly taking prove that you are the publisher of Twitter, and that Twitter is therefore a publication. It is not, as you have legally asserted, merely a notice board on which anyone can write whatever they like and you have no responsibility for it. You have now eschewed that get out clause, that get out of jail clause, because you are acting as intrusive a publisher as any Beaverbrook, as any Murdoch, as any magnate, any mogul has ever acted. And that's okay if you're honest about it, if you don't pretend to be something that you are not, and if the rest of us can sue you every time we are defamed on your platform. Because for me, that's 10, 20, 30, 50 times a day. I note that there's a controversy running about whether or not Boris Johnson was booed at St. Paul's Cathedral when he showed up for the Queen's Jubilee service. Some people say the boos were of a tiny handful of people. Some people say there were far more cheers than boos. Some people say the opposite. I'm here to say, who cares? I've never understood the significance, selective significance, that media apply to people booing. By the grace of God, I have 6 children. Me and my good wife can muster 8 booers. At any event, at the drop of a hat, we can go and boo and get on the television with the report that whoever it was we booed was booed. But what does it mean? Other than that in my household, we booed the woman or the man that turned up to the event. It means nothing. I'm the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. I can call on my comrades right now. I can field 100, 200 of them right now to go anywhere and boo anybody. But what will that actually mean? Other than that, 100 or 200 members of the Workers' Party, either out of loyalty and love for me as their leader, or because they hate the person I asked them to boo. That's all that it means. People's popularity cannot be measured in who booed or cheered them, because it depends on that most capricious of happenstances, who actually turned up at that place or was mobilized to turn up at that place. Everybody in public life has people who absolutely love them. Even me. I was in the Chinese supermarket in Manchester yesterday, and the first person I met what turns out to be an eminent academic and author, a Chinaman, who embraced me and asked for a selfie with me and then tweeted it. I meet people like that all the time that really love me. The great majority of people that I meet or come across neither love me nor hate me. Maybe don't even know me or don't care to. And there's a number of people who hate me so much that they'll not just boo me from behind their screens, and they will issue threats to kill me. They will issue insults, blood-curdling, not just against me, even against my wife, even against my children, even against the football jerseys that my children are wearing. Why do I mention all of this? Because it doesn't mean Boris Johnson is any closer to being no confidence because a half a dozen members of the Socialist Workers' Party jeered and booed him at St. Paul's and went there for that purpose. Neither does it mean that because the vast majority of the media hate Harry and Meghan, that the people hate Harry and Meghan. As a matter of fact, I actually think that Harry and Meghan are more popular than Charles and Camilla. Not that that's saying all that much. Mutt and Jeff are more popular than Charles and Camilla. Burke and Hare are more popular than Charles and Camilla. Tony Blair and Alastair Campbell, to name just three duos that are more popular than Charles and Camilla. But my point is, sic transit gloria. Some people love you, some people hate you. Most people don't give a toss one way or the other. That's why you need to know and listen to both sides of every story. Which brings me back to the new McCarthyism in which we're gripped. You see, if it were not for my friends Niall and Jenny in Galway organising that webinar yesterday, the people who watched it, who notwithstanding Twitter's efforts are many, wide and varied, would never have been able to hear that side of the story that we represent. And that's bad for two reasons. One of them more important than the other. The least of the two reasons is that this McCarthyism, this extirpation, this false branding, this shadow banning, me and Peter Hitchens can't get our Twitter follower numbers above a certain number. Soon as it reaches that number, it begins to come down. No two people could be further apart than me and Peter Hitchens. But algorithm is deliberately seeking to keep us below a certain number. It's as clear as day. All of this makes a mockery of our shtick. Our shtick is that we are free countries. Our shtick is that we are democracies filled with charity and freedom of speech and expression. It makes it a mockery because, of course, you can't have virtually total censorship, not just in mainstream media, but in now social media, on matters of war and peace, and call yourself a democracy. But the second reason why this is not just wrong but dangerous to Britain, to America, to France, Germany, to all the people involved in one way or another in this war in Ukraine. It's dangerous for this reason. If you don't know the other side of the story, how do you know your side is right? If you don't know that the war is now going disastrously badly for NATO and the coup regime in Kiev, until you start calling it Paris, until you start calling Germany Deutschland, or Moscow Moskva, don't ask me to change the name of Kiev. Now that the war is going disastrously wrong for NATO and Kiev, if you don't know that, and the vast majority of people don't know that yet, then you'll agree to your rulers continuing to reinforce the failure. You'll agree to your rulers getting more and more deeply involved in a war that, unbeknownst to you, because you're not allowed to know, is now going Russia's way. Big time, big time. Russia has almost cut Ukraine in two. Within a matter of weeks, there'll be two Ukraines, and yet your rulers and their echo chamber in the media are continuing to lie to you about the course of the war. Lie by commission and lie by omission. I'm not prepared quietly to go into that good night. Are you? Buckle up. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Yeah, hi, George. The deep state, we mentioned it before. So rather than fear-mongering that everything that's going on at the moment with the COVID, the wars, blah, 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 why aren't we all addressing the deep state rather than this fear-mongering that's going over and over again?
How do you address it?
What I'm trying to get across, and hopefully your listeners will understand this, there is a deep state at work, and you know that.
Everybody knows that. That's a statement of the bleeding obvious.
So let's do something about that. Rather than ratting and rolling about the...
Give us a lead. Be our leader. Be our leader, Del.
Who are the deep states?
Yeah.
Oh, what a brilliant question. Those that are all over us. What should we do about them? We should make them accountable.
I'm just trying to work out whether you're in the territory of shape-shifting lizards or you're talking about MI5 and MI6.
Please don't turn it into a circus, George. You know full well what's going on, and please don't.
I do. I'm just struggling to get from you what it is we should be doing about them. What should I do about MI5 and MI6? And how should I do it?
Just stand up and go, there's something inherently wrong here. And
there's something really wrong here. There you are. I've sorted it, Del. Thanks for the call.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
There's the first poll of the evening. Should Prince Harry and Duchess Meghan A, abdicate, B, reign over us? A, abdicate, B, reign over us. There's no C, which crudely summarized would be, I don't give a toss. I actually watched an amazing film on Netflix last night, quite unexpectedly. What was it called, Ghadi? The King? I think it was called The King. It's really good. There's nobody in it that you'll ever have heard of, but it is produced by Brad Pitt. don't let that put you off. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, about the Prince of Wales, who unexpectedly, though a wretch and a lowlife and an adulterer and a fornicator and a drunkard and all the things that Prince of Waleses can be, he becomes a king that wins the Battle of Agincourt through brilliant military tactics, and the battle scenes are utterly phenomenal. They rival, in a different way, Saving Private Ryan for battle scenes. You remember that one on the beach? Well, this one is in a field, a then unknown field called Agincourt, where for Prince Hal and for St. George, the archers won it. And my goodness, the battle scenes are, well, to die for. Check it out on Netflix. How did I get onto that? Yeah, Prince Harry was how I got onto that. Should Prince Harry and Duchess Meghan A, abdicate? 85% so far. B, reign over us? 15%. And that is more or less the same on Twitter, YouTube, and on Telegram. Virtually identical. If you are, by the way, on YouTube, first of all, please subscribe to my channel. I'm still just that away from 200,000 subscribers. But if you are watching on YouTube, please let me give you the story of my good friend Ian Puddock. He has just donated £50 to the Fighting Fund to reinstate the podcast and the midweek mother of all talk shows. God bless you, Ian Puddock. Now, how did Ian do it? He just went on to the super chat function on YouTube and clicked it. And that's what came through, £50 from Ian Puddock. Thank you very much indeed. Ian Puddock is a very brave man. I've known him for a very long time. He is one of my most dedicated watchers and listeners to this show, and often contributor to this show. He's a fascinating man. You should follow him on social media, and you'll often be surprised at some of the things that he says and does, like supplying gin made, I don't know, from old saddles or something, old boots. What would I know about gin? But it seems to be catching on because he's now supplying the, I don't know, household cavalry. I saw a picture of him just the other day with all these bearskins and red tunics, and he's in the Ministry of Defence. He's supplying gin to some of the most surprising places. And as you have just seen, he's very generous indeed with the profits that he makes. Thanks, Ian, for that £50. Here's the telephone numbers to call the show: 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522 if you're in the United Kingdom. If you're in the United States or Canada, it's toll free, costs you nothing. +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. You can email the show anytime at onair@moats.tv. Now, the one and only Ghadi Francis joins us from the Middle East somewhere. I'm not sure if she's in Beirut. She often is, but wherever she is, she's going to tour the Middle Eastern horizon with us. Ghadi, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with Jerusalem, if we may. One of the last speeches I gave in the British Parliament sought to warn the parliamentarians that Jerusalem was a powder keg which could not just explode, but could envelop not just the region, but draw in the world, being the epicenter of religious faith, being the holiest of places in the holiest of lands. And yet, these holy places are now being routinely desecrated, threatened, undermined, and that powder keg looks ready to blow to me. How does it look to you?
Well, I couldn't agree more, actually. Hello, Mr. Galloway. The pleasure and honor is always mine to be on the mother of all talk shows. I send the regards of everyone in Beirut, and I'm speaking from Beirut today. Actually, in front of me is a book called How Long Will Israel Survive? It's from Oxford, and the writer is a journalist in The Economist. On that note, I wanted to start because this is what I've been reading. They have been doing this apartheid way of dealing with Palestinians. The atrocities continue, places of worship, kids, women, civilians, journalists, and everything is becoming worse day by day, year by year, to the extent that now the threat is from within. Israel started on a self-destruction manner because when they started this occupation in our region, it was under a certain banner of secular Zionism, of a refuge for the Holocaust survivors, of etc., etc., etc. 7 years into the occupation, they have become worse than what they fled. The atrocities that they have been doing, and never before did they not care about their image internationally. We saw what they did to Shireen Abu Akleh. 1 week after murdering Shireen Abu Akleh, they murdered another journalist on the Flag Day race. There was hardly any journalist, any correspondent that wasn't harassed and tackled, and they threw bottles at some France 24 correspondent. They tackled physically the Al Jazeera correspondent. These were not the happenings before. And this can only go one way from here, because if you look at it demographically, if you look at it historically, if you look at it from the human rights angle, no matter what angle you take, this cannot prevail. Evil cannot prevail. Killing innocent people cannot prevail. Getting like the way people are marching the streets, these far-right groups, far-right Israeli groups, even the Israelis themselves do not accept it. There is an inter-Israeli problem. There is this political delusion that they're going through. If you look at the Israeli polls and the Israeli press following each and every, they're not safe anymore. People are not safe anymore. Seculars are not safe anymore. LGBTQ are not safe anymore. This before, even Netanyahu himself, according to that book, after 2015, it so became that Israeli leaders had to follow the crowd in being as Nazi as possible, as rightists as possible, as even killing of innocent people had to be covered up and had to be rallied, whereas it wasn't even the same before that. And I think every year, last year, what they did to Al-Aqsa Mosque came after like an accumulation of Sheikh Jarrah, of attacks here and there, and it resulted in Saif al-Quds, and it was a war that they lost. And for the past 2 decades, please tell me, which war did Israel win? In Lebanon, in 2000, they lost. They left our country. They occupied places. In 2006, they were shamed. They were beaten a big defeat. Now, every now and then, you see a drone. One simple Hezbollah drone named Hassan drone. 45 minutes. No Iron Dome could hunt it. No security check could hunt it. It stayed. So people are not safe anymore in that so-called only democracy in the Middle East, and its so-called only democracy is not a democracy anymore. Not when you have these rightist groups screaming death to Arabs in the street. Not when you have cold-blooded murder of a correspondent, a journalist, an American passport-holding journalist. And I want to tell you one thing, Mr. George, just to end on that note. The day Shireen Abu Akleh was the day of her funeral, These areas inside Jerusalem that the people were there, the people were holding her coffin and marching, these were areas that Palestinian people were not being able to march freely in for decades before that. And this is why they had to bring in all the army and even attack people who were just attending the mass, attending the funeral, because the sight of people, civilians, peaceful people walking there was actually freeing parts of Jerusalem. So this is demography now speaking, and the act of biology itself says that Israel is on its self-destruction path already, and it's a matter of time.
I'm glad that you brought up the intra-Israeli conflicts, which, as you describe, are now breaking out with a great deal of vehemence. In Haaretz, the leading Israeli newspaper, this week, they carried an editorial, not an op-ed, I should call it, which they showcased on their front page, which said that, that Zionism had been a mistake, that it had produced a mutant Jewishness, which contravened virtually everything about Jewishness. Everything about religious Jewishness was contravened by the viciousness which has been produced by Zionism. And Haaretz, and of course we frequently interview some of their writers, is perhaps ahead of the game, but not by that far. It is becoming increasingly obvious that no people that regards itself as truly religious, like the many of these Hasidic sects, like the Neturei Karta and so on, or truly progressive, truly liberal, truly leftist, can have anything to do with thousands, tens of thousands of flag-waving fanatics chanting death to Arabs, Shireen is dead, and a little boy that they murdered is on the grill because, of course, they burned him to death and so on. That doesn't, you can't coexist in one people. Two very dramatically different kinds of people, can you? What a pity. We just lost Ghadi. I hope it wasn't anything I said. We will try and get back to her. Should Prince Harry and Duchess Meghan A abdicate, B reign over us? You can vote for the next hour or so. Yes, Ghadi is back. Ghadi, did you catch my not so much a question as a series of observations? Yes, please respond.
Yes, I did. And actually, this is why I came here to quote one of the studies. The base of Zionism, when they started, what is Zionism? As a beginning, it was like a movement in Europe to find a place to hold this arrangement for Jews and make this. Today it's a different. The founders were secular in a way, and this is what their studies, Israeli studies, are writing. Today it's highly contradictory. You cannot say there's a liberal Zionist. And this is why, exactly the points that you stated, this is why the end is very near, because there's no more identity in that anymore. And even on polls that were held for Jews across the world, the Jew diaspora, the basic support for Zionism has a totally different, alienated perspective on what is happening or what they want to happen on their so-called homeland. It is very different. The status quo on the land is very different. And we must recall that in the elections in the 2014 elections, I think, there was this video it's just a typical ad video under the name "What is Zionism?", where some politicians were answering what Zionism was for them. It was a house to maintain that no one can transfer their money. It was security for all the citizens of the state. It was responsibility for these people. Now, 70 years in, they couldn't do anything. If we don't want to speak about the security issues, we can speak about the economic issues. They're every day they're not safe, the feeling of they're not safe. Plus, what Naftali Bennett did, Naftali Bennett was a rallied right leader that some people liked, but like he's for his statesmanhood, it was a matter of question for people. Now, when he is the head of the government, this person is a person who said in the United States, he said like bluntly, today, the era of secular Zionism is over. He said it in a Saban forum in Washington in late 2014. This man that told the world modern Zionism is all about creating a shelter for Jews. It was a secular approach that had the audacity to change history. But 100 years on, the reason we're in Israel is not because it's a shelter. So he's changing what the basic identity of Zionism was. So what they stood on, the land or the ground or the debate or the argument that they stood on 70 years ago is not here anymore. The argument today is hate, 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 kill, 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 being a fanatic, and this will take them into one place only. Any sane Israeli person, any sane secular person is packing now, is trying to find their place elsewhere, and fanatics will stay, and fanatics cannot win a war when they are overnumbered.
Well, that is, of course, one of the problems that the best people in Israel leave, and I have known many of them. I was for a time frequent visitor to Tel Aviv, to Hanke, where I had some very good friends who were very active supporters of the Palestinian rights and the Palestinian cause. All such people have long left Israel because of the rise and rise and rise of this now hegemonic extreme. Even Bennett did not want that flag-waving disgrace on the national flag day. Even Bennett did not want that. I'm sure about that. But he's not strong enough to say so. He's not strong enough to stop it, because these people are becoming more and more and more the real power in Israel. Last word to you, Ghadi.
Even when we speak that Bennett couldn't control it today, we are speaking about Bibi. Even Benjamin Netanyahu, the once different leader that had he had a feud with army leaders when the IDF soldiers used to assassinate people. Even Benjamin Netanyahu has to go with the flow if he wants to persevere like in politics. So now the fanatics are leading the politics of Israel, and this is its destruction. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome, and always a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for bringing us up to date. Should Prince Harry and Duchess Meghan A, abdicate, B, reign over us? Lee Barrett, thank you. Lee has donated £50 on the super chat, and he says, please bring back Wednesday night's mother of all talk shows. Thanks for that, Lee. That's what we're trying to do. Michael Gillespie donated £25. He says, keep up the good work. Your indignation and information are a breath of fresh air in a polluted world. Thank you, Michael. Beer and Flies has donated $50. Thank you so much for that. And Remborn has also donated £50. Keep them coming in. Via Super Chat is best. I'll read out your messages, and if you've got a question for me, send it on Super Chat now. Steve Hanke is a famous economist. He is the senior fellow at Cambridge and a director of the Troubled Currencies Project. Troubled currencies was what drew him to my attention because of the boomerang effect on the Russian currency, the ruble, of the economic sanctions that most Western countries have now applied. But it was his warning, chilling warning, of what fuel poverty was going to do in Western countries next winter that made me think I'd very much like to talk to him. I'm glad to say he joins me now. Professor Hanke, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. We'll come to the currency issue in a minute, but I wonder if you would care to reprise in succinct form what it is you think is going to happen in fuel poverty terms as a result of a whole range of things, but including the cutting off of Russian oil and gas.
Well, thank you for having me, George. Let me, if I may, correct your attribution for me. I'm a professor of applied economics at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and I'm actually speaking to you from Baltimore. I'm not from Cambridge. In any case.
My apologies. My apologies. Johns Hopkins is even just as distinguished.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. In any case, to this first question, what you have with sanctions and the history of sanctions, that sanctions are ineffective, immoral, but unfortunately politically convenient. And the sanctions that have been put on Russia will affect, obviously, the oil and gas markets. And they will affect them in ways that are really unintended, kind of negative consequences associated with sanctions. This always goes along with sanctions, George. They're ineffective in the sense that they do not change the behavior of the targeted enemy. They don't win wars, and they don't change regimes of those targeted enemies. In fact, what they usually do is entrench the enemy because they stimulate what's called a rally around the flag effect. You actually circle the wagons. Once the population realizes that their leader or their regime is being sanctioned, they know they're the enemy, they're being fired at, so they tend to kind of circle the wagons, rally around the flag. But let's talk about the unintended negative consequences. We are going to have a massive disruption in the international gas and oil market as a result of these sanctions. And that will simply mean, pure and simple, that the price of oil and gas around the world for everybody is going to be higher than it would otherwise be. You know, since the Arab oil embargo in the early 1970s, since that ended, we've essentially had a pretty free flow of oil and gas moving around the world. This is coming to an end. We will have a politicized market. We won't have a free-flowing market. George, let me just give you one. Go back to 1979 for a minute, George. What happened in 1979 that was big? The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Jimmy Carter was the president of the United States at that time. Brzezinski was the national security advisor. Brzezinski said, "Oh, we have to stick it to the Soviets." Of course, Brzezinski couldn't stand the Russians or the Soviets. We got to stick it to them. And we, the United States, put a ban on the export of grain from the United States to the Soviet Union. Now, what did that do? That created what I call the Afghan effect. The Soviets right away went to Argentina, and they cut a deal with the Argentines. They said, we can no longer purchase grain from the United States, so we're going to purchase it from you. They got a good deal from Argentina, so they weren't hurt. the ban on export of U.S. grain didn't hurt the Soviets because they got a good substitute at a good price. It did lots of damage to American farmers, however, and American farmers were the main ones who did not vote for Jimmy Carter when he ran for a second term. So politically, it was a complete disaster for Carter. And in addition to that, it was a huge benefit for who was in power in Argentina, one of our arch enemies, the junta, because they had a terrific economic boom in Argentina. So that's how these sanctions, unintended negative consequences, always work. And there's a huge literature on this. It's unambiguous. It's very definite. The problem is politicians have no interest and pay absolutely no attention to it.
That is understandable. Politicians are frequently idiots. We can see that on our screens. But we used to have a fourth estate, the media, whose job it was to scrutinize the actions of politicians, to subject them to analysis by academics and analysts like your good self. And bring that information, counter information, to the government's own propaganda before the people. None of that is happening now, though, Professor. You and I are having this conversation. By the end of this week, 1 million people will have watched it, but the other billions of people in the world have no access to this countervailing discussion that you and I are having. That's a big problem, isn't it?
Well, it's always been a problem. It's gotten worse. I have always instructed my students to follow and pay attention to what I call my 95% rule. 95% of what you read in the press is either wrong or irrelevant. So that's the starting point. Now, the problem is worse because what they've done in places like the White House, they've bought huge industrial washing machines with big spin cycles in them, and they're spinning. And the press is beholden to the spinners. Where does the press, even the top line press, to get access to the points of power like the White House, they have to behave themselves and they have to repeat what's in the spin cycle.
Quite so, although what that has to do with journalism is very difficult to see. But then real journalists like Julian Assange can suffer grave consequences. So maybe there's that chilling effect also. Let's go, if we may, to the currency question. It is only 100 days since commentators and politicians in Western countries were dancing on the grave of the ruble, smashed into rubble, you might say. Now the ruble is doing quite well, thank you. How did that happen?
Well, it happened. Let me make just one general comment. The governor of the Central Bank of Russia happens to be a very clever woman and operated very effectively in this crisis. And now the ruble, of course, it's stronger against the US dollar than it was before the Russians invaded Ukraine. So it's super strong right now. Now, part of and this is due to the entire apparatus that they've set up to, shall we say, protect the ruble in a way, and it's worked. What can I say? How many central bank governors? Most of the central bank governors in the world right now are running around trying to make excuses for what has caused the huge inflations in the countries that they're in. And they refuse to indicate that their mismanagement and printing of too much money is always the cause of inflation, and they have caused inflation in all these countries, but they're running around saying everything. I mean, President Biden has even said that Putin is causing the American inflation of all things. It's Putin, the supply chains, COVID, a million things. But what in fact is causing the inflation in the United States? Too much government spending that started when the COVID pandemic hit. That started under Trump, by the way, and it was accelerated on steroids with Biden. And who has been financing most of the government deficit that was created by that spending? The central bank in the United States, the Federal Reserve, has been monetizing the deficit, creating a tremendous growth in the money supply, and bingo, we have the highest inflation we've had in 40 years in the United States. You've got the same thing going on in the United Kingdom, as you well know.
Now, Icarus flew too close to the sun, and we know what happened to him. All this printing of fake money by particularly your central bank, but also ours and others, it can only have one effect, can't it? It can only reduce the stability and ultimate value of that currency. Otherwise, economics that I was taught and the economics that you are teaching mean nothing. If we're wrong, then our economics has all been for naught. It is a truism that too much money chasing too few goods equals inflation. And if you are merely turning the printing press, or in digital terms, keeping your finger on the button and letting the zeros multiply, can only lead to inflation. And therefore I'm asking you as the expert, what's going to happen to the US economy and the UK economy? What's going to happen to the dollar?
Well, first, let's talk about the dollar. This is kind of a little bit ironic, George, but the dollar is extremely strong right now. It's not as strong as the ruble has been, but it's extremely strong, and that is due to the fact that it is the global international currency. Whether you like it or not, there's always one international currency that dominates, and the US dollar happens to be that currency. And once troubles break out any place in the world, whether it be a war or economic troubles, any kind of troubles, people go to the safe haven. They go to the global currency. And so they have gone to the US dollar, and it's gotten very strong. Now, that's the dollar. But you said, well, what's going to happen to the US economy and the UK economy? Inflation is baked in the cake. They've produced so much excess money that this excess money will still be kind of in the monetary bathtub, waiting to overflow and overflowing within the next year or two. So we will see a continued sustained inflation in the United States this year, as well as 2023, no matter what the central bank or the government actually does. And you're going to have the same problem in the United Kingdom. Now, the other aspect of that is that the central banks are scared. They want to rein in inflation. And if they overdo things and tighten things up too fast, they will dump us into a recession. So that would be the worst of both worlds. We're going to have inflation no matter what. And if they dump us into a recession, then we are going to have what they call stagflation. And by the way, these sanctions, these international sanctions, aren't helping that picture at all, because the high energy prices, by the way, are going to ultimately end up tanking Europe without any question. They're going to have very severe negative unintended consequences in Europe. and the Europeans are literally flying blind. If you look at a big industrial powerhouse like Germany, for example, it's very dependent, its industries, on power, on energy, and fossil fuels. Well, now they've got basically the Greens running the show in Germany, and they're going to find out pretty soon they're just not going to have power. What are they going to do? They're going to have to slow down. So I think they're in very serious trouble on the continent.
I do too. Professor Steve Hanke, an honor actually to speak with you and to hear you speak. Thank you very much for joining us from Johns Hopkins University, just as prestigious as the Cambridge University I mistakenly ascribed him to. Now, the poll is going big, actually, but it's not good for Harry and Meghan, who overwhelmingly are thought to be worthy of abdication rather than ruling over us. Now, over the weekend, I told you about my Sunday selling Indonesian food for my good wife that had come from her good hands. I was yesterday at a car show, a classic car show, near Manchester, where two of my children live, the wonderful Tatton Park Classic Car Show. There's a reason why I was there and why I'm about to show you this video. Watch this. If you had told me when I was a kid that Ford Poplars used to be cheap as chips when I was 10 years old, would have a line of admirers at a car show in Cheshire, I would never have believed you. Or that the Consul, the Ford Consul, will become not a consul but a king, one of the finest in show. Or that this beauty, Sunbeam Talbot, would become top of the show. I would never have believed you. Sunbeam Talbots were never shabby cars, but they were never regarded as the pinnacle of engineering and manufacturing excellence. But when I look around, as you'll see this car show, you'll realize just how ugly modern cars have become compared to their antecedents. In fact, almost the farther you go back, the more beautiful are the cars. You'll also see that whilst there are many millions of cars in Britain, almost none of them were made here. And even those that were made here are not made by companies that are owned here. It is a remarkable transformation how Britain, that was once the king of the road, has become a pauper in this regard. It's not that we don't buy cars, it's not that we don't need cars. We do both in profusion. We just don't make them ourselves anymore. Somebody else is making them. It's a sign of the manufacturing decline of Britain. When I was not young, but in my 20s, 30s, Britain had a car industry, a truck industry, a motorbike industry, a steel industry, a coal industry, a shipbuilding industry. We were the workshop of the world right up until the 1970s. Now, I'm afraid we're bargain basement. Pound shop are us, if you get my drift. So, in this broadcast, back in the studio, I'm going to look at the reasons why our cars became uglier and less British. Take a look around this show with me. This was the real people's car, the Trabant of the German Democratic Republic. Long gone, like the Trabant. You can almost, in fact you can, smell the leather, even through the camera. This was my family car throughout my childhood. My father drove it until there were holes in the floor. He used to joke that it was like the Flintstones. You had to run in order to get the car to move. Many a time I saw him using the starting handle, thinking he was going to have a heart attack on cold mornings, turning this engine into life. And we travelled everywhere, all over Britain, all over Ireland, a whole family in this little baby Austin. Austin of England. I briefly had one of these in Austin, Cambridge. I bought it for £100 and it broke down after a few days and was irrecoverable. Worst buy I ever made, but it's a beautiful car. Inspector Morse's car. Not literally, but the car he drove. Beautiful old Jag. This is the Austin Allegro. It sums up the decline of Austin. This was near the beginning of the end. I had two of them. They were absolutely awful cars, as well as being pot ugly. G. It's a British classic. Vauxhall. The once humble Vauxhall. Now a thing of beauty. Another Vauxhall. Don't make Vauxhalls like this anymore. You buy it, you get George Michael and sorry, the George Mitchell singers. Not George Michael. Yeah. And Pinky and Perky.
Go home.
Look at the tax disc.
Wow.
Look at the tax disc.
1961.
He's gonna go home.
It's the only one left in Britain of 1961. Average house price when this was made was £2,777. A pint of milk was 3p. And finally, the acme of British engineering, the Only Fools and Horses special three-wheeler. Whatever happened to three-wheelers? They used to be really common. At football matches, there was a big row of them. Disabled people used to get them. It's a Rialto. Fancy name. I was hoping my sons would pledge an E-Type Jaguar to me, but instead they pledged that Rialto, the three-wheeler that we saw in the car park at the end. I could speak for hours on this subject. That would be a liberty because not everyone is interested in it. But let me sketch one or two ideas that I hope you'll respond to, either in writing or on the telephone lines, and perhaps we can return on another occasion to them. I'm posing, first of all, aesthetic questions. How did we go from the Austin Cambridge to the Austin Allegro? How did the makers of the Austin A30, the baby Austin that I practically lived in as a child, right up until my teenage years, that was way in advance of the Mini, by the way. So Austin was already making a Mini car, albeit rounded rather than a square. How did that company go from there to the Allegro? How did the MG disappear? How did the Sunbeam Talbot disappear? How did the Jowett Javelin, made in Bradford, disappear? Why did the Mayflower wilt? Why did the Ford Anglia, all edges and wings and fins and a thing of beauty, where did it go, my lovely? What happened to you, Ford Angela as we used to call them. Why did cars get ugly? It doesn't cost less to make an ugly car than it does to make a beautiful one, does it? Of course, I know about the quadrupling of the oil price in 1973 from practically nothing to, well, 4 times practically nothing. But as Professor Hanke just told us, since 1973, we've had a more or less constant flow of oil, petrol, and the price has been relatively stable. Some prices have risen far more than the price of petrol and gasoline. For example, the house prices in 1961, average house price in Britain, 2,777, whereas the pint of milk has gone up from 3p. The reality is, it isn't explicable only by the need to reduce energy consumption. It isn't explicable only by the need to use lighter materials. I mean, I look at cars that cost hundreds of thousands of pounds that I'm sorry to say my sons seem to admire. To me, they're like fiberglass plastic trash compared to the motor cars I was just looking at there that are, of course, solid steel. So it's not, in my view, entirely explicable for economic reasons. Something has happened to our aesthetic, and that which, you could say the same about railway engines, that which was beautiful is now ugly. It seems to me a metaphor for the cheapening, coarsening of what's happened to us over that time. I may be being sentimental and romantic, but I defy anyone to look at the Triumph Herald, the Triumph Sprite, the Triumph Dolomite, and look at what we have today. I defy anyone to look at that Sunbeam Talbot or the 1960 MG open top that I don't think was in the film, but which I spent a lot of time talking to the owner who's trying to sell it to me for 30,000, but I told him I'm not best placed right now. I defy anyone to say that that which came before was not much more beautiful, pleasing on the eye, pleasing to the user than what we have now. Now, of course, people say, well, mod cons, safety functions, you know, seat belts and ABS and automatic transmission and heaters and air conditioning and CD players and so on. But of course, our designers could easily have, as time passed on, adjusted the design of these beautiful cars to include mod cons and safety functions and so on that we no longer have. As to why fewer and fewer are British, I'm being told in my ear, I've already spoken long enough, I may have to return to that another night, but the truth is, in my lifetime, which, you know, it's not short, but it's not that long, we have gone from being the workshop of the world, building ships of steel, our own steel, in furnaces fueled by our own coal, ships that sailed the world with laden with our manufactures. We have gone from that to where we are now. Bargain basement, pound shops, recipients of other people's inward investment, if we're lucky, and of course, entirely dependent on its continuation. When we were king, British capitalism performed atrociously. It had atrocious industrial relations, through its grotesquely poor management. It exported a massive proportion of the capital it accumulated to make more short-term profits overseas in other markets where the workers worked almost for nothing. It invested fantastically little in R&D, research and development, when other capitalist countries were doing the precise opposite. Were investing their capital at home, were particularly front-loading their economies with R&D investment and research, where universities were studying engineering instead of media studies, instead of studying Hogwarts and Harry Potter at university, you studied how to turn a piece of steel into a thing of beauty that would be a joy forever. These are just some of my thoughts. I'm still thinking about that tour of that field in Cheshire yesterday. It makes me sad that our country has come to this. Let me turn to my good wife, who's got a social media roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
I just quickly want to add to your bit on the classic car show, because I also really enjoyed it. You know, we shared a love for these classic models, and in one of the last cars that we looked at, it had a printout on the window of all the things from 1961, when the car was made. And you mentioned the average house price being £2,770, a pint of milk being 3p, a newspaper being 1.5p. The average yearly wage was £700 then in 1961. And this was also added to the list. The season ticket to watch Manchester United was £8.50. There you go. So that was...
Well, if they play next season like they did last season, you'll be lucky to get £8.50 for a season ticket. Anyway, go on, sorry.
So Robert P. says that Joris Bonson overstayed his welcome and is leading Conservatives into the hell they deserve. Pity he's dragging all of the UK with him. Brexit means Brexit. And Kenny Gibbon says, Blue Moon of Kentucky, keep on shining, and adds £2 in donations to it. And we have...
Thank you, Kenny.
Yeah, thank you, Kenny. And also Robert P., by the way, he also donated £9. So Jed says, what would it be like right now in the Ukraine if Zelensky had submitted to the Russian demands? What would be so terrible and worse than this ongoing war? What would it be right now?
Well, of course, he was poorly advised not to implement the Minsk II agreements that he actually signed, and his guarantor powers, Germany and France, were very poorly advised in not forcing him to. That was the meaning of their guarantee. They did not live up to it as guarantors, and it's cost them now exponentially more to pay the consequences, all of the consequences of a war, which could have been avoided for the implementation of Minsk II. And of course, Minsk II will not be anything like the final price that will now have to be paid. Minsk II would have avoided the war, but now that there's been a war, and now that Russia has found out who its friends are and who its arch and bitter enemies are, the economic consequences will continue for the rest of my life, the rest of your life, the rest of our children's lives. This is a turning point in world history.
Yep, it is.
So it would have been better all round if Zelensky and his two guarantors had done what they promised they would do when they signed the Minsk II agreements, and a lot of blood and treasure would have been saved.
Yep.
Anything else?
Stefan Mazanaru says, God save the Queen. the great advantage of a constitutional monarch is that it can't be corrupted as it has too much to lose. And
I don't see how actually almost all the monarchs except this one was totally corrupted. I've no idea what that can possibly mean. How do you think they became monarchs in the first place?
we've become quite...
They became monarchs
Yeah.
and dukes and princes by murdering, fornicating, stealing other people's wives and property and murdering their own cousins, even their own brothers. What do you mean monarchs can't be corrupted?
I know.
Seriously?
Yeah. Well, you and I have become quite some experts about the history of the British monarchy, haven't we? Watching all those.
Particularly the Tudors. We know every crime of the Tudors now.
Raf says, congratulations, Wales, for qualifying for the World Cup. Do you think now we will hear the end of all this Ukrainian football love fest?
You mean Wales beat Ukraine? Yaki da! They must not have had a fifth column in their country of Wales, willing their own people, their own players, to lose because their opponent was Ukraine. Not like Scotland, I should say, where everyone from the political class right down to pitch side, with former captains of the Scotland football team, like Graham Souness, openly wishing for Scotland to lose. Wales didn't have that. Yaki da.
Indeed. Yes, Yakida, indeed. Let's see. Suzanne Seddon responds to the poll by saying they should all go, especially since they don't stop pushing the WEF climate agenda on us plebs while they fly around in the private jets and gas-guzzling cars. Hypocrites.
Quite so. Now, before I let you go, many of the viewers are wondering why you had me in retail this afternoon. I was glad to do it, of course, not just because I love you, but because I love the product. Tell the viewers about the product.
Yeah, well, this is just a hobby that went out of hand, really, because every time we had visitors over, everyone fell in love with this product, which are basically spring roll crunches. And we have the original version and a spicy version, and the spicy is proper spicy. I can guarantee you that. And it's just, wow, it's just, everyone was so excited about it. So at some point, and then I just thought, well, what if we bring it to the market? Shall I do it? Shall I not? And then suddenly came this International Food Fest along, who offered me a table. So I said, okay, why not? Let's do it. There we go.
And you sold every single pack.
It was sold out. It was sold out very early. Yes, I was very sorry that I hadn't prepared more. But now the people know, and they can reach out to me, and we'll be there again next year.
And they can follow you on Instagram and on Facebook.
Yeah.
What's the name?
It's Satu Foods, SATU Foods, because Satu means one in Indonesian. So it's one foods, Satu Foods.
Excellent. And I promise you, you've never tasted anything quite like her Pineapple Delight or her spicy, and there's even extra spicy, spring roll crunch. Thanks, Gayatri, very much indeed. Should Prince Harry and Duchess Meghan abdicate? Looks overwhelmingly like they'll have to go. 83% abdicate on Twitter. 86% abdicate on YouTube, 84% abdicate on Telegram. It looks bleak, Meghan and Harry. I might sling my hook back to California if I was you. And remember, you can donate to the Fighting Fund to relaunch the midweek MOATS on the website, which is moats.tv. And go to the donate and put in your card details. Every little helps to keep the show going. Even $1, £1. I mean that most sincerely. Let me take a quick break, and then it is the one and only Richard Medhurst up next.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
That was the retreating back of my wife, who had come forward to powder my nose. I'm very sorry about that. Thankfully, she was fully dressed. Here are the phone numbers, 08081 965522. And if you're in the United States, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge wherever you are in the US, Canada, or the United Kingdom. Now, I spoke to you last week about one of my best achievements, certainly the most unexpected. I've become a novelist, not just one, but two novels. One a sequel to the first. And I think it's an idea that's time has come. As a matter of fact, it's more pertinent now that we know again that fascism still exists in Europe, to speculate on what might have happened if Hitler had crossed the Channel and conquered at least part of this country. Who would have resisted? Who would have collaborated? We've all got our own ideas about that. Maybe we'd be surprised. There was a patriotic bourgeoisie and even a patriotic section of the aristocracy in Britain. Equally, there was a collaborationist, a traitor class. And there's no doubt that there would have been people in the City of London rushing out to sell financial services to the advancing Nazi Gauleiters and their forces. But equally, there would have been in the East End of London, which is where the resistance begins in the first of my books, Queensway, but stretching all the way to the Scottish Highlands and the castles of the aristocracy. There's the initial book. I love that front page. It's called Queensway. You can get it from georgegalloway.shop, and its sequel is this one, Black Lake. Equally, I love that cover. Kudos to those that designed it. I think it was Gayatri actually that designed this second one, but it might have been my good friend James. So this one follows on from Queensway. If you've read Queensway, I'm pretty sure you'll definitely want to read Black Lake. And if you haven't read Queensway, you probably want to buy them both. And so they're going at literally a knockdown price. I think it's £8.99 for both novels. And one day, maybe when I'm gone, the film rights for this series will be purchased, and my children can live comfortably. I hope so. Anyway, georgegalloway.shop. You'll get both books for £8.99 plus postage, of course. Now, Richard Medhurst is truly a young and rising star, rapidly rising. I told you I'm just that from 200,000 subscribers on YouTube. He's already at 100,000 and more. His audience for his absolutely indefatigable work is growing and growing exponentially. That's because not only is he clever and sharp and eloquent, but that he is right in the analysis that he is making of the international situation. And there's a market for being right, you know. There's a market for being truthful, you know. Both Richard and I are quite happy to share and collaborate in that market for truth and honesty. He joins me now. Richard, my young friend, thanks for coming back on the show. Sorry we didn't get to you last week, but better late than never. We had Ghadi Francis from Beirut on the line earlier, on the show earlier, talking about the situation that Israel finds itself in, not just vis-a-vis the Palestinians it occupies, but also internally, in terms of the deeper and deeper divisions involved inside Israel, and where they all might lead. So let me start at least by asking you about Israel's situation internationally, because it did, under Trump, have a golden age of new sweetheart deals with Arab countries, the so-called Abraham Accords. But those accords don't look so rosy today as they did when they were signed. Am I right about that?
Well, George, first of all, thank you for all your kind words, and it's very humbling and an honor for me to be on the program again. So thank you. The Abraham Accords, I mean, they never looked rosy for the Arab people. That's for sure. I think this wasn't reported too much in the press, but you know, when the Israeli foreign minister visited Bahrain, for example, you know, people were going out on the street and protesting against it because this is the sentiment among Arabs. And in Morocco, for example, the embassy, the mission there, rather, the Israeli diplomats in Morocco couldn't even find a place to rent. They've been living in a hotel, if I remember correctly, for 6 months because no Moroccans will lease them any property. So I think that really says a lot. And if we look at this on an international level, you know, Sheldon Adelson and Donald Trump, yeah, they certainly gave Israel a golden time. That's for sure. You know, there were many concessions. For example, the Americans moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and pay attention, Joe Biden has not changed that. In addition to that, Trump recognized Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. Syria as the occupied Golan Heights since 1967. He recognized them as Israeli, as if they're his to give away. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the Abraham Accords, getting Bahrain and the UAE to establish ties with Israel. I really don't know if they do look that rosy right now. The Saudis, for example, everybody knows the Saudis are dealing with the Israelis under the table. But the romance between the Americans and the Saudis is not looking very good right now. They're very upset with Biden, and he's going to visit them soon so he can try and get oil prices down, which of course makes real sense, right? We can't buy oil from the Russians because Putin is a dictator, but we can buy oil from the Saudis because they're a total democracy, right? That makes a lot of sense. So I don't know if they're going to be able to continue this plan of getting more Arab countries to normalize with Israel just yet, but I have no doubt that they're continuing this under the table. And I would just add one more thing. Pay attention. The viewers should pay attention to all the countries who refuse to recognize Israel, refuse to back down, and refuse to rescind their support for the resistance. Look what happens to them. They seem to be stumbling into so-called accidents, right? Libya, Yemen, Syria, so on.
Yes, let's talk about perhaps the biggest accident that befell the American empire in the last 50 years is the Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution still stands tall. It has many things wrong with it, but the one thing that you can say has always been right with it is that it has stood up to the empire and refused to buckle. And that has endured through this last period of awful economic sanctions that were designed to make the Iranian people suffer so much that they would overthrow their system and their government. That never happened. Now normalization between the countries that were in the Iran nuclear deal is inches, days away from being concluded in Vienna, and Israel doesn't like that and keeps seeking to throw spanners in the works, whether by causing diplomatic rifts with the US or merely assassinating important figures inside Iran. The latest, a general in the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps. Tell us about Israel's attitude to the renewal of the nuclear deal and whether you think it's going to go through.
Well, George, you really took the words right out of my mouth. I think you really put it perfectly, because one of the most important things about the Iranian Revolution is not only that, by the way, they had a huge participation. You know, usually in revolutions, there's a lot less of the population that participate. In Iran, a big chunk of the population participated in it. So you really can talk of a grassroots thing. But one of the most important things which you highlighted is the support for the oppressed. Iran is de facto the quote-unquote leader of the resistance axis, although I caution saying that, because the whole point is that it's not about having a leader of a group. It's about all these countries standing together equally and, combating imperialism. But without Iran, I mean, where would Syria be today, right? You'd have the black flag of ISIS over Damascus if Iran and, of course, Hezbollah, Russia hadn't helped out. Where would Yemen be? Where would Iraq be right now? Still under U.S. occupation, still the threat of ISIS. Where would the whole resistance axis be? Venezuela, a world away, is benefiting from Iran's, hospitable and generous stance. The Palestinians themselves, Hamas, the Islamic resistance, the resistance itself in general, all over the world, I think, has benefited greatly from the Iranian Revolution, because that's one of their valors. One of their values that they stand with the oppressed, right? And so they really don't just say that, they actually do it. And Iran has really stuck its neck out a lot and suffered politically because of this. One of the reasons we mentioning you spoke of the Iran nuclear deal. One of the reasons Trump left it and the Israelis are so unhappy about it is because it doesn't include so-called limits on Iran's support for the resistance axis, which they call, of course, when they talk about it, they don't say resistance axis, they say Iran's malign activities in the region, right? And they want Iran to cut support for Hezbollah, for Hamas, for Syria, and so on. And, with the Iran nuclear deal, throwing in spanners, as you eloquently put it, is really what's going on. They killed that IRGC colonel the other day, in the Khobai was his name, I believe, in the Quds force. They assassinated him in front of his home. And then just a few days ago, you have the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, which is the UN's nuclear watchdog. He goes to occupy Palestine. He speaks with the Israeli Prime Minister, and the Israeli Prime Minister is lecturing him about nuclear weapons and saying that if Iran, this issue with Iran isn't dealt with, then we reserve our right to use force. Well, Israel is the one that has nuclear weapons, an undeclared nuclear arsenal, I might add. Israel is the one that has refused to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran has signed it. Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. So, I mean, the imbalance here and the sheer audacity of it, Bennett lecturing Grossi about nuclear weapons, the irony is not lost on me or you, George, I believe. It's really quite something that they allow this. And they never criticize Israel for having nuclear weapons. Yet they make a whole fuss about Iran, which doesn't even have a nuclear weapons program. Iran is one of the most surveyed countries on earth in terms of nuclear energy. They have cameras in every facility and so on. And the reason they want to destroy the Iran deal is because they want to keep Iran isolated. That's what Israel wants. Israel does not want Iran participating in the world economy, being able to sell and its oil and trade. They want to keep Iran under sanctions because people forget, up until 3 months ago, before the war in Ukraine, Iran was the #1 sanctioned country. They also removed Iran from SWIFT. And so, these evil sanctions, lethal sanctions that target only the civilians, they want to keep them on Iran and make it a pariah. They know it doesn't have nuclear weapons. It's all about isolating Iran.
It hasn't worked, though. And as we've been discovering over the Russian sanctions, that can turn into a boomerang. And it certainly has turned into a boomerang over Russia. The Saudis, on the other hand, have, as you talked of a minute or two ago, have fallen out of love with the United States big time and are now being wooed by, or wooing, I don't know which, China and Russia. Lavrov was getting the red carpet treatment in Riyadh in the last couple of days. These are things I never expected to see happening. So the plates are shifting in the Middle East, Richard.
Yeah, I never expected that either, honestly, George. It's quite a time we're living in. Honestly, I think obviously the war in Ukraine is a terrible, terrible tragedy, and we all wish it never happened. But in terms of geopolitically, the ripple effect that it's had globally is unbelievable. It's really you can't just look at the war in Ukraine by what's happening in Ukraine. You have to look at what's happening outside as well. And you mentioned a couple of issues there. Lavrov getting the red carpet treatment. I mean, it's really something. And I saw the Saudis as well. They were contemplating selling oil to the Chinese in renminbi, in the Chinese yuan instead of US dollar. Right. I mean, this is unprecedented. I've never heard of such a thing. Right. We've seen Russia selling oil to the Indians in rupees, rubles. What a time! Really, what a time! And the boomerang effect that you mentioned, it's again, I don't think either of us would gloat at that because it's not funny at all. It's actually a tragedy. But I think this is the first time that Westerners, we're actually feeling a tiny bit, just a tiny percentage of what sanctions do. Usually when they put sanctions on Syria, they put sanctions on Iran. No one even knows. You ask someone in the street what sanctions are, they don't even know this word. And they're kind of living in a blissful ignorance. And this time, the gas prices are up, oil prices are up, food prices are up, there are food shortages. It's really something. The Americans don't even have baby formula on the shelves, but they find money, $40 billion, to send to the arms dealers, and under the guise of aid. I really think that these are incredible times. And in terms of what's happening in the Middle East, Turkey also, I think, is taking advantage of this to go into Syria and use its leverage because they want Finland and Sweden to get into NATO, but it's not going to happen if Turkey doesn't say yes. And Turkey thinks they can, quote unquote, misbehave. It's much more than misbehaving, but they can take advantage of the situation and leverage to take more territory from Syria. So they're also, very interesting but very negative side effects and results from this ripple effect.
You throw a pebble into a pond and the ripple becomes one day someplace a tidal wave. Richard Medhurst, thank you. You are a force of nature, your good self, and everyone needs to follow you and listen to what you are saying. Give me a 60-second break. Count them.
This is not a test. This is your emergency broadcast system. Announcing the commencement of your weekly programming sanctioned by the mother of all talk shows. Support for the working class has been authorized for use during this program. All free speech is non-restricted. MOATS Legends of Ranking 10 have been granted straight-to-air status and shall not be harmed. Commencing at the siren, any and all free thinking, including socialism, will be legal for 3 continuous hours. Political incompetence, bigotry, and emergency medical personnel at Ward 5 will be unavailable until the program concludes. Blessed be our glorious teacher and mother of all talk shows. A University of the Airwaves reborn. Release George Galloway. May God be with you all.
Okay, if you're in the United Kingdom, 08081 965522. If you're in the United States or Canada, +1 844 944 3344. The lines are busy already, and let's go to Idaho, where Eve awaits on Russia and the Ukraine. Go ahead, Eve in Idaho.
Hello, George. Please allow me to, I cannot help telling you that, even though this is not the point. But you started the show with talking about what we call the French, you know, la défaite d'Azincourt, you know, that war. And it was so much on the point, because who was leading France at the time? He was a man ridden with dementia. He was Charles VI. We call it Charles VI le Fou, you know. And who was leading England at the time? It was one of your best minds. It was, I think, Henry V, you know, who was one of the best strategic minds that English had. And so you cannot help making the comparison between Putin and Biden, and you see where it leads, you know. So just, I could not help it. But no, the point I wanted to make is, it appeared to me last week, is that there is a very strong parallel between the environment dementia, you know, about this carbon footprint and so on, and the war in Ukraine. And remember that in Glasgow, we were told that it would be the end of the world if we didn't reduce the footprint and so on. And a few months later, well, nothing mattered anymore but the expansion of NATO, and you could not sacrifice that. So the point I wanted to make is that the West knew that in order to reduce the footprint, the CO2 footprint, and the fertilizer, because this is the same story, the fertilizer is extremely expensive on the, for energy. In order to do that, we have to, it's terrible for the poor people of the earth, for the global south. And the war in Ukraine is a way to make Putin, to accuse Putin of all the troubles we wanted to create with this greenhouse effect and so on. So now we can blame him for the problem of food. And the problem of food, of course, if you want to cut down the emission of CO2, you are going to have the problem of food. So I think there is a link between the two. I don't know if I explained it well.
You did. It was a brilliant call from first to last. Thanks, Yves. Yes, the French were led by a fool, and the English, as they then were, led by a tactical and strategic genius. Any comparison to current leaders in the world is purely coincidental. On the line is Councillor Akif Akbar from Wakefield, who is a candidate in the by-election, which is coming up there following the conviction for sexual offences against an underage minor, aged 15, of the previous Member of Parliament. We certainly need a new broom in Wakefield. Councillor Akif Akbar is, in my view, the best of the brooms on offer. That's why he's on the line now and why I'm taking his call. Councillor, welcome to the mother of all talk shows. How's the by-election going?
Thank you for having me, George. The by-election itself is extremely tough. There's a lot of challenges. Absolutely my first time doing it. Nonetheless, I'm giving it all I've got.
Yes, it's the first time you've stood for Parliament, but you were very successful electorally as a councillor. You were elected as a Conservative councillor, but you soon saw the better of that, and now you're an independent. That must stand you in good stead, I would have thought.
Absolutely, George. Last May in 2021, I stood in the Wakefield East seat. It's been historically a Labour seat, and it's the safest seat that Labour had in Wakefield. Nonetheless, it's my local community, and I'm known to the people there, and I was very successful in that. And we took down a Labour seat, what they called a red wall seat, and the headlines read along the lines of shock result in Wakefield East. People were saying I'm crazy to do it. I was part of the Conservative Party, which made it all the more difficult, to be honest, because people were voting for me as the candidate as opposed to the party. I remained a Conservative councillor for approximately 9 months. I was unhappy with the whip system, being told to do certain things, which of course I never obliged to, and I was trying to do the best for my residents in Wakefield East. And eventually, I withdrew from the party, withdrew the whip, and became independent.
Yes, and you'll be the better for it. Tell me, what platform are you standing on in this by-election? What are you offering the people?
Well, George, first of all, I'm offering them a local candidate who knows Wakefield. But further from that, I'm trying to take Wakefield away from the national parties. I feel like whatever MP is going to be elected, if he's part of the Labour or Conservative group, he's just going to be either taking orders from Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer. We've been failed many, many times in the past, and I'm offering myself as an independent candidate to do what's actually best for Wakefield. And we have so many problems in our city. Unemployment is an issue. We've got empty shops. Our local NHS is an issue. Our streets are an issue. Policing is an issue. There's issues with our green space. Of course, the cost of living crisis, which affects everybody in the country at this moment in time. We have problems with public transport, with our local bus company going on strike tomorrow. So there's so much to do, and I think these national parties that come in with, they don't really know the city. They've had Simon Lightwood parachuted into Wakefield. Doesn't really have any allegiance to Wakefield, apart from being the ex-staffer for Mary Cray, and just giving it the talk of how he knows Wakefield, turning up to these charity places and things like that, turning up to our workplaces of worship and showing how he cares about them with fancy videos. But these are things that are the pinnacle of our community, and I feel like they're being abused by these parties. They're putting together manifestos and plans with 5-6 points on them, which don't really address the issues that we have here in Wakefield. And I feel like if you don't actually know the city, how can you? How do you know what issues we have? You're just taking orders from somebody in some fancy office in London, telling you, look, this is what the voters want. But I'm not feeling it. I've been, pre-last year, I was never into politics. In fact, I rarely voted. And I took a stand last year because I was sick of the councillors. I thought, what are you doing? You ignore us. You turn up to our local places when you want the votes and you bugger off and never have anything to do with us again, and we can barely get a hold of you. I think I've done a damn good job as a councillor in the last year. None of my residents can come forth and complain. I've always been there. I've always been on the ground. I've been extremely proactive. And I hope to do that as an elected Member of Parliament if I'm lucky enough to do so.
Well, let's hope you get the reward you deserve. Councillor, how do people contact you? How can they help your campaign?
My campaign is largely based on Facebook, and anybody can search my Facebook, which is Councillor Akif Akbar. That's CLLR space Akif, AKEF, and space Akbar, AKBAR. I'm very proactive on social media. I put myself out there. Of course, there's $40,000 to $50,000 in Wakefield, and I don't have a national party's backing. And like the Labour Party, like the Conservative Party, who have members from all parts of the country turning up to try and tell the residents of Wakefield what's best for Wakefield, I only have the support of the residents of Wakefield who are from here. So I'm really grateful for that. But we don't have the same level of manpower. So I'm very vocal on social media. I put myself out there. I answer questions. I make videos, and just to give people a real feel for who I am, what I'm trying to do, and get an understanding, if I'm a candidate, that they wish to back.
Councillor, pleasure talking to you. I wish you the very best of luck on polling day. Thanks for joining us. Councillor Akif Akbar, who is the independent candidate in the upcoming Wakefield by-election. Other candidates are available. If any of them would like to call in the show, I'll make sure that they are showcased. Joe is on line 1 in New Jersey, but wants to talk about UK politics, I think. Let's hear from Joe.
George, best wishes, and God bless the Palestinian people. God bless Julian Assange, who stands up for what's right. God bless the people who stand for the right and the good of humanity. God bless them. George, you know, we got some serious problems here in the United States of America. And I wrote something a few years back, and I named it Terminal Decline. We have now entered the phase of terminal decline of the United States of America. A non-reversible decline at this phase, no matter who the next president will be. Our legislators of the Democratic Republican Party are incapable and inept of rescue or reversing this terminal hypersonic decline at this point. They are responsible for bringing us to this phase of hypersonic terminal decline. Very best wishes to our America. Brace and prepare for impact. And I signed it, Joe America. These legislators, they raped, they robbed, they ruined, and they wrecked our America for their own personal gains, for their own personal greed and their own personal profits. Every day they go to work to take from us and give to themselves. They live high, fat, grand, happy, careless, and carefree off the hundreds of billions of dollars they raped from our America. They live high, fat, grand, happy, careless, and carefree off the hundreds of billions of dollars they stole from we the people. They steal from our poor and they give to their rich. They have divided the American people. They destroyed the foundation of our America, the unity of the American people.
It was abruptly brought to a halt, but it was powerful rhetoric, I must say. Joe in New Jersey, thanks for that wholehearted expression of how disenchanted you are with today's America. I personally am not sure that it was ever any better, but I'll go along with you that it's definitely getting much, much worse. Now, not that the United Kingdom is in rude health, very far from it. I've been touring the country, presenting my film, Killing Kelly, about the strange death of the weapons expert, Dr. David Kelly. And on the 25th of this month, Monday the 25th, so I think it's 3 weeks tomorrow, I'll be in the Copthorne Hotel in Newcastle. You can still get tickets. I hope you will. I'll present the show and I'll answer questions and we'll have a good discussion. There's the ticket details there. ticketsource.co.uk/Killing Kelly. Here's a taster of what you'll be getting.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You've been thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts, the mother of all talk shows, with George Galloway.
Sharp-eyed viewers will have noticed it's the 27th of June, Monday the 27th of June, in the Copthorne Hotel in Newcastle, and not erroneously, as I have said, 25th. The 27th of June still, though, is, I think, 3 weeks on Monday, and there are still tickets available, so please get them quickly, particularly if you want seats near the front, so you can hear even better the pins drop as people realize whilst watching the film the sheer magnitude of the crime that they are looking at on the screen. Because crime, make no mistake, it undoubtedly was. There's a new poll. Will monkeypox be the new COVID? A, yes, B, no. You can vote on my Twitter handle, you can vote on my YouTube, you can vote on my Telegram. My Telegram channel is t.me/George Galloway. Don't forget that on Wednesday nights, until we get the mother of all talk shows back, then I do a no-budget television, 1 hour on YouTube on a Wednesday night at 10 p.m. It has no budget, but it sure has an audience. All or in part, last week's show has now been seen by well over 100,000 people. That's a show done just by Gayatri and me, and nobody else, with one camera at absolutely no expense. If you want, though, to get this Sunday mother of all talk shows, replicate it also on a Wednesday. If you want the podcast that was breaking all records, breaking into the top 10, top 20 in every country in the world, if you want that back, please give to the Fighting Fund so that we can do it. We've just spoken to a candidate from Wakefield. Let's hear from a voter in Wakefield. It's Mark. Go ahead, Mark in Wakefield.
Good evening, George.
What would you like to say?
Well, my first question would be simply this. Why has my favourite news channel, RT UK, been taken off the air despite Boris Johnson saying in Parliament that freedom of speech would be upheld, and then clearly it hasn't, because it's just another lie. I can no longer view RT UK. There are two sides to every coin, George. There's the West side and there's the Russian side. I have had that liberty, that freedom of press, taken away from me. I can no longer get two sides of the coin. I only see one. And it's the Western mainstream media that is just brainwashing me and millions of other peoples into its purported case of war crimes, war crimes, war crimes. It's like going back 20, 30 years and listening to, I don't know, the war on terror, or the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, and then this mass media just coming in and bombing an entire country into submission. It's just disgusting, and I'd like to know why Boris Johnson made that speech saying that I wouldn't have RT UK being taken away, and I have. So I can't.
Well, look, that's a brilliant call, Mark, and an unanswerable case, some of which I reflected in my opening monologue, and which you have supplemented this evening. It's not just that it's wrong, morally wrong, to stop people from gaining access to alternative perspectives, alternative takes on big and important issues, especially issues as important as war and peace. It's not just that it's morally wrong, though it is morally wrong. It's that it is fraught with a terrifying danger that an ignorant population, willfully kept ignorant by their own state and their own government and their own collaborating news media, will continue blundering on the wrong course until we fall over a cliff to a terrible fate below. All because we didn't know the other options were available, that the other side of the story should have been listened to. It makes, as I said earlier, a mockery of the idea that we are the land of the free, still less the home of the brave, but it is a recipe for disaster. And a very significant thing happened this week. Henry Kissinger, aged 99, the man with more blood dripping from his hands than any other human being alive in the world today, was himself blacklisted instantly, blackguarded instantly, non-personed instantly, pushed beyond the pale instantly, because Kissinger, the mass murderer, said, hey, this war in the Ukraine is a bad idea, and that we better negotiate now rather than continue on the path that is leading to disaster. Imagine, Henry Kissinger and Donald Trump are practically the only two prominent voices in America that are expressing a point of view which any sane person would express if they knew all the facts. Now you can donate via Super Chat. Click on the icon, dollars, pounds, etc. Marie Teresa Hughes has given £1.99. Marie, thank you so much. Carol Hope, £5. Maria Nova, US dollars, £5. That's the level of donations I'm looking for. I'm not asking you for much. I'm asking you for little. I'm asking many of you to give little so that we can have 2 shows a week, as we were very successfully having in the in the recent past, and we have had to close. I'm waiting for my next guest, who is a representative of the Romani traveller people, because coming up from Manchester last night, I saw on the motorway a notice that the Appleby Horse Fair was coming up on, I think, June the 9th for the week, which is a sight to behold, where travellers and gypsies, Romani people, gather together and trade horses and look at each other's beautiful horses and have a whale of a time. It's a very ancient tradition in Appleby in Yorkshire. So I realised then, I should have known, that it was the week of the Romani traveller gypsy community, and that their history is a valid history. Now, you know me, I'm generally on the side of the underdog. I like gypsies. Gypsies like me. I've always stood up for them. I remember when I was on TalkSport and there was a huge eruption over, I think it was called Dale Farm. I was practically the only commentator on the airwaves that was standing up for the travelling community. I don't know why. Maybe I like them because the wrong people hate them. Maybe I like them because the feelings evinced towards them are so utterly irrational and point in directions which lead to perdition, which lead to catastrophe, as they did in the Second World War in the 1930s. Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, people of disability, mental, physical, were all sent to the charnel house. And I'm with the people that the beast of Nazism wanted to destroy. Let's go to California while I wait for our Romani spokeswoman, and we'll speak to Attila. I think we have already before, but this time he wants to raise the question of, is it Kiev or is it Kiev? Attila, you say tomato, I say tomato. Should we call the whole thing off?
Yes, good idea. Hey, one thing before we go to that, let's discuss the name of another city. Now, my Jewish girlfriend sums the whole Zionist view up as this, very simply. The name of the city is Jerusalem, not Jerusalem, and that's where the whole thing starts. Now, what's with Kiev? Because I've always heard it was the Kievan Rus who were the original what became Russian people. So what is this a semantic debate or is this a PC thing?
I think it's a PC thing. Most of the people involved in the debate have no idea of the semantics of it. As I say, you say tomato, I say tomato. I'm not going to start changing my pronunciation of names of cities, not willy-nilly anyway. I rather prefer Bombay to Mumbai, but if I was speaking to an Indian to whom that was important, I would say Mumbai. I have changed from Peking to Beijing, but I haven't changed from Brussels to Bruxelles or from Paris to Paris. I haven't changed from Germany to Deutschland. I haven't changed from Moscow to Moskva, and so on and so on and so on. So I'm not sure why everyone kicked into hysterical overdrive over Chicken Kiev. Tell me, what do you think?
You got a good point there. I do call it Deutschland, but here's the other thing. Down where I'm originally from in Alabama, how do you say the news service DW? The German news service. How do you pronounce it?
Deutsche Welle.
Down there,
Deutsche Welle.
Down there, they call it Douche Welle. So I'm not going there. that's just a little, yeah. Well, listen, George, thank you much, and we'll leave it at that.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Attila in California. Brilliant. Will monkeypox be the new COVID? Yes, 23%. No, 77%. Though on YouTube, it's 33% say yes, 67% say no. And on Telegram, it's yes, 35%, no, 65%. So get voting. You can vote right up until the end of the show. A wonderful donation by Chris82, who has donated £90 and says, keep up the good fight, George. Hail, hail. Hail, hail is a traditional greeting between Glasgow Celtic supporters. Hail, hail, the Celts are here. And it's a grand old team to play for. And if you knew their history, it would make your heart go, oh, 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 oh. Chris, thank you. You've made my heart go, oh, 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 with that donation. Thank you. And Dan G gives £2. Equally welcome. Thank you, Dan. And Arlen Everest has given $10 and has just ordered the Queensway novels. How wonderful. Now, Chris, the travelling community is kind of leaderless. It's not hierarchical, but a Twitter friend of mine by the name of Chrissie has long corresponded with me about the issues that affect the travelling community. And so I was delighted that she accepted our invitation to come on the show tonight. And indeed, she has. Chrissie, wonderful to see you. I mentioned earlier that this is National Romany Gypsy Travellers Week. Not a lot of people know that. Why do you think that is? Black History Month and, you know, Gay Pride and all that, they're all central now to our cultural discourse. But before you tell me that, what should I call your community? Gypsies, Romanes, Travellers? What is the preferred nomenclature?
My particular community, it's Romany Gypsy. Gypsy was a slur, but we've kind of accepted that more now. But certainly the proper term is Romany. Travellers are Irish, Scottish, are a different type, if you like. They're indigenous, for instance, to Scotland and also to Ireland, whereas Romanis are of an Indo race. They left India many, about 500 years ago. They reached here to Britain. So my particular race is Romany.
That is fascinating. So I presume you've DNA'd yourself, and does it show this Indian ancestry? Right. And if so, why did people from India come all the way to Scotland, Ireland?
Well, they did, and we think it was probably because the Afghans invaded India, and we think the Romani started to leave because they were taken slaves by the Afghans, and they were used as warriors, and they were used to carry their booty, gold, etc. And I think they left India probably to escape that persecution and slavery. They travelled through, as you know, through Europe and ended up here about 500 years ago. So we've got a long but checkered and sometimes dark history, I'm afraid.
Indeed so. Indeed so. So just to close that part of our discussion, not every traveller is a gypsy or a Romany, but is the corollary true that every gypsy, Romany travels?
No, absolutely not. And that's why I take exception really with the name traveller, because that was a name that was put upon us. We travelled, especially the Romany travelled, because that was forced upon them, George. They didn't really have a choice. They were just like the, in various parts of the world now, we see people seeking refuge, the Ukrainians for one. That was forced upon them, and travelling was forced upon us. So I don't actually like the term traveller, because that's something that was put upon us. I am a Romany. The Irish chose to travel, and the Scottish, because they travel for their for their work, and to sell their wares door to door. So they chose to travel, but Romanies didn't choose. It was a case of they had to move. They had to go through those countries.
And what's the relation between these two distinct groups that many people thought before listening to you were one? I mean, do people intermarry amongst these two groups? Are they friends? Do they ever come across each other? Do they share any traditions, culture?
I think they share quite a lot of traditions and culture. We're, probably everybody knows this, but we're fastidiously clean. I think we had to be, and I think that's where it comes from, because travelling, the conditions that we found ourselves in really, and had to live in, it required us to be fastidiously clean because of disease and that kind of thing, obviously. And that's something that carries on today. Travellers, the Irish travellers, yes, they do. We do intermingle. Not a great deal, I've got to be honest. The Irish are a separate group, but we do meet up now and again, but the Romanies tend to keep themselves to themselves, and the Irish tend to keep to themselves. I do know travellers and Romanies that have married, some quite successfully, but we are a separate group, there's no doubt about that.
Now, going back then to the first question I intended to ask you, though your answer has been fascinating and educational to me. Why is it that the public has a set? I know this from the Dale Farm episode. The public, the majority of the public, has a set of prejudicial views about your community, or communities, I should say, and doesn't really want to celebrate them in the way that nowadays we appear to, even the police force appears to, celebrate, for example, those in the community that are gay, or those in the community that are black. Your community doesn't get quite the same level of attention. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's the old adage, really. Traveller racism, gypsy racism is the last acceptable racism. We do, of course, have the Gypsy Roma Traveller Police Association. There are many Romanies and travellers within the police. A lot of people don't realise that we are out there and we are serving our communities, and we are trying very, very hard to integrate in the respect that we want to be respected. And we are trying very hard to do that, which really brings us to the Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month, which starts on the 1st of June every month and runs throughout June. It's a way for our communities to try to communicate and draw in the wider community, let them see our culture, let them try to understand the history, And it gives us a chance to try and break down the stereotypes, George, and do our best to dispel some of the hate that undoubtedly still exists, unfortunately. We do this for the sake of our children, for our grandchildren, for future generations. We don't like this hate. There is, as they say, good and bad amongst all. And it's like me blaming your community for one person in your community for for a thing that they did, and blaming the rest of the community for it. It's just a nonsense. It's silly. Certainly, I can only speak for myself and my family.
So what, Chrissie? What kind of things will be happening over this month?
Well, a good start for anybody who wants to become involved, and I'm going to give them a plug here, is to go to the Travellers Times. They will list a whole lot of travellers and a lot of events that are going on around the country. You can also approach your town council or county council to ask what they're doing to celebrate Gypsy Roma Traveller History Month. There is a lot going on, but we do obviously need to plug it more, and we do need to get out there and get the events publicised, really.
And they should follow you on Twitter, as I have done for a long time, because you are a font of information. Chrissie, thanks for joining us. I wish you every success in the course of this month, and hope that the day will come when these prejudices and this hate is no more. God bless you. Thanks so much indeed for coming. MK on Super Chat has given $19.99. Much obliged, MK. Dear George, outstanding work. Thank you. Thank you indeed. On line one is Ian in Feltham in England about Tony Blair. Go ahead, Ian. What would you like to say?
Well, I'd like to say, George, I haven't heard much about his knighthood coming up just recently, because I understand there's quite a protest going to be held in Windsor. Do you know anything about that?
There is a protest, but I don't know anything about it. I'm not invited to it or involved in it, but it is going ahead. I think it's in the afternoon. But the exact gathering place and time, I'm not sure of. I have a feeling it's in the centre of Windsor in the afternoon of the day that Blair is to be invested, if that is the word.
I think so.
It is a monstrosity. It is a blemish on the Queen and on the royal family that they have chosen to make this award, and I hope that everyone who can will go to Windsor and raise their voices against it. Go ahead, Ian. Last word.
As I know, George, it's assembling at 1 p.m. at the Queen Victoria Monument of Windsor and Eton, Riverside.
And the date?
13th.
The 13th of June at the Queen Victoria Monument. At what time?
1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Blimey. 1 p.m.
Yes.
On the 13th. And lesser speakers will be available. I wasn't good enough to get on the platform. Ian, thanks for the call. Let me take a quick break and then back to Gayatri for the final social media news roundup, and then calls right up to the end of the show.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland, even the European, which he then owned, all over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
Somebody sent me a great joke, Oliver Law. My neighbour says, I look at Britain these days and I think, this is not the country my granddad fought for. Mind you, my granddad was in the Ukrainian Waffen SS. Very funny indeed. Thank you for that. Now, that Maxwell story is one of the most successful things on my Patreon page. That's patreon.com/George Galloway. But I suspect that the football podcast, George's Best Football Podcast, that I have just begun last week was the first episode, will soon overtake it. In tomorrow's show, George's Best Football Podcast, we'll be interviewing the one and only Michael Knighton, who's in the news at the moment. And Michael Knighton is the man that briefly owned Manchester United, and frankly would be better off if he still did. There's the logo for it. So it's Mondays at 8 p.m, patreon.com/George Galloway. And there's a lot of other content there also. But let me not keep my good wife waiting. Ghadi, what's rattling?
We've got a new poll going and people are responding to it. Steve Dixon says, we've got Ukraine for the spring, monkeypox for the summer, and more COVID variants for autumn and winter. Calamity 2007.
I like that one. I like that joke. Oh no, not monkeypox. Not the monkeypox season already. I've just taken down my Ukrainian decorations.
That one.
It's like a ritual, isn't it?
I love that one. So apt. So apt. Calamity 2007 says, I don't believe so. It is already proving to be not nearly as virulent as they would have liked. And I think people are too fed up with lockdowns to accept them again. Too busy concentrating on unaffordable gas prices and an approaching global famine. Eric Suarez.
Quite so.
Yeah, Eric Suarez says, Viva AMLO, Viva Rusia, y Viva Jorge Galloway.
Oh, how very nice. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Yes.
Anything else?
Well, we're getting a lot of donations through the Super Chat. So thank you all for that. So what you do is you go to...
Yeah, I've got one here, Ghadi. Artex, £5. You're a good man, George, a good man. May the working class of Britain rise up and hold these thieves and criminals that rule us to account. Very, very nice. There's how you do it. There's the super chat mechanism. Sorry, Ghadi, give us some more, please, social media.
John S79 says, clearly is the preferred agenda. Why settle with one pandemic when you can have another? Capitalism has transmogrified to corporatism, authoritarianism, and kleptocracy. 40 years in the making, Thatcherism has finally run its course, and now we live in a totalitarian nightmare.
They're going to have difficulty making this monkeypox fly, though, aren't they? I mean, it's not like COVID where you can just breathe it in as you go along the street. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, on a family show, you have to get kind of close and personal with somebody that's got it.
Yes, that's right. No, I think they won't get the same effect as the first round. So yeah, and it's showing. Okay. It shows in the pool. So there you go.
Okay, best of luck with Satu Foods. I hope you've got lots of new followers on Instagram and Facebook. Satu Foods is Ghadi's new business on which we are now, for income, more or less entirely dependent. Chuck is in San Diego and wants to talk about US gun laws in relation perhaps to what I had to say earlier about it. Chuck, go ahead. What would you like to say?
Yeah, George, great show as always. But I did want to make a clarification on what you said last week. I agree and disagree with you simultaneously. The Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, that does not mean that the American people can have any weapon that they want. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't play a lawyer on TV, but I'm going to read a quote from Warren Burger, who was the Supreme Court Chief Justice from, I think, 1967 to 1981. And it reads as follows. The gun lobby's interpretation of the Second Amendment is one of the greatest pieces of fraud, I repeat the word fraud, on the American people by special interest groups that I've ever seen in my lifetime. The real purpose of the Second Amendment was to ensure that state armies, the militia, would be maintained for the defense of the state. The very language of the Second Amendment refutes any argument that it was intended to guarantee every citizen an unfettered right to any kind of weapon he or she desires. Now, this was upheld by one of the most right-wing justices of my recent memory, Justice Scalia, who said that the American people are not entitled to any type of weapon that they desire, and therefore there is a right of the government to regulate the weapons. Now, that being said, what I do agree with you on, in these times of authoritarian government, it is not a good idea for the government to come in and take away your weapons. They have already relegated the First Amendment to Twitter and Facebook so that they can do what the government can't do and take away your right to free speech.
Well, that's a brilliant call, Chuck. I didn't disagree with a single word of it. So you might be agreeing and disagreeing with me at the same time. I'm entirely agreeing with you. Thanks, San Diego. Chuck, let's go to Portland, Oregon, and talk to Dennis. Go ahead, Dennis. What would you like to say?
Hey, good afternoon there, Mr. Galloway. It's a pleasure to be on your show. I've been an admirer for a long time and followed you for quite a number of years. But anyway, I'm glad these guys were bringing up this the Second Amendment thing, and a little bit of background before I go here. I was once an airline pilot a long time ago in Boeing 727s as a second officer, and we have pilot shortages now that are manifested by the jab more than anything else. People refusing to get it. But back on point here with the Second Amendment thing. You know, where I live in Portland, our situation here has deteriorated to the point where it's quite out of control. And by the way, I lived in London in 1969 in Kenton, actually, and I'm quite sure you know where that is. And I never felt.
I do, yes.
I never felt unsafe when I walked the streets of London, even though there were a lot of skinheads back then, and they would chase Yanks like me if they heard our voices out loud and stuff. But I never feared for my life. But here in Portland, you know, it's degenerated to the point where the police have absolutely no part in it, and I think that because they've declared it a gun-free zone, more or less, they made it so your concealed carry permit is null and void in the city limits. They basically made it so that we have to fend for ourselves, and I don't know, maybe carry a baseball bat or a sword or something that's not a firearm to defend yourself. So I'm not saying everybody on this planet really needs to tote a gun, but you know, unlike the way the United Kingdom used to be, where actually Bobby's didn't have anything but a billy club, as you might remember those days. We've now gotten to a point now where the situation is so bad in most of the United States where gun ownership might become an absolute necessity, not because we're crazy nut jobs, but because the situation on the streets, because the drugs being legalized, causes us to be in harm's way everywhere we go out here.
Wow, what a powerful call, Dennis. Thanks for making it from Portland. Dennis used to live in London. Brian does live in London. Let's hear from him on the subject of the RT news ban. Brian, go ahead.
Oh, hello, George. Yeah, just very quickly, just to say, I very much sympathise with the guy who phoned you a short while ago. He was very, very disappointed and dismayed, and not being able to watch RT UK. Yes, indeed. See, TV broadcast has been curtailed across Britain and Europe and other places, but you can watch RTs live online. You can watch it at the Rumble website, at the Odyssey website, and maybe other websites too. If you just Google Watch RT or Watch RT Live, then these websites, they were advertised on the RT website. Before that, I think that was taken down as well. They do come up. You can watch the Rumble and Odyssey. They're both video and live video websites. You can watch RT UK live on the Rumble website and the Odyssey website. And if you Google Watch RT, other sites come up, as I recall. Other sites come up as well. So you're not completely blocked. I'm happy to say, from watching RT and also on the there's also other things. Just one other thing I'd like to say, but you can watch RT online live and watch previous episodes of the shows at those Rumble and Odyssey websites.
Well, I'm sure many will find that very helpful, Brian. Thanks very much indeed for that. I haven't seen RT since, I think, the first week of the war. And I'd very much like to see how the war is going from their point of view, because I kind of think it's obvious that there's two sides in every story, and if you are only looking 24/7 at one of the sides, you're unlikely to be in possession of the full facts, never mind the truth. Wayne is in Cheshire on British Cars. Go ahead, Wayne.
George, I wish you would have known you were at Chatham Park, because the other day I only lived 2 miles away.
All right, it's a wonderful park, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it used to be quite. We used to go in the 80s, and it was about £12 to get in then. So I'd imagine it's £20 now.
Well, to one of these big shows, what did we pay, Gayatri? 11 per adult. But to be honest, it was worth it.
Oh, that's not bad. That's not bad. I don't know if it's still there, but one of the biggest meteorites in the world is kept in the hall. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, it is. We didn't go in the hall, but it is there, yeah.
And the other thing which is really interesting...
Two of my sons don't live far away, so I'm in Manchester very, very often. And of course, Manchester United are my abiding footballing interests. So Manchester and surrounding area is very much part of my manor. Now, what did you want to say about cars?
Right, basically, it was a perfect storm in the late 70s, which basically changed the design of cars. There was 3 or 4 main reasons. Number one was the European directives on the design, because what was happening was when cars were doing 30 mile an hour in the old designs, chrome at the front, square, looked lovely, but when they were hitting children, they were killing them. So the directive was to car manufacturers, we want you to make vehicles now that can bump children off and they don't die. That's why they became all-rounded. And what happened was, in the late 70s, in Turin, Fiat Car Company made the first car in the world which was all done by automotive, auto technology. No human hands touched the car until it was made. And it was the Fiat Strada. And that ticked all the boxes. It had a rounded front. They were using new plastics so kids could bounce off. And it also had the new aerodynamics, which was that shape. Because if you look at that car, that was the first one, and all other manufactured basically did the same design for them reasons.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of highly debatable contentions in that, Wayne. I'm not sure that children do bounce off the cars that we make today. I take your point that, you know, a big Jaguar sticking out the front or a big Rolls-Royce crest sticking out the front is of course a hazard. But you can design lighter and less lethal materials beautifully. You don't have to make them ugly because they're aerodynamic. You don't have to make them ugly because they're made of a lighter material. There are many things that are made today using today's technology and today's materials that are nonetheless aesthetically beautiful. But I see now the cars that people think of as wonderful cars, like Lamborghinis and Ferraris and so on. I see them as the epitome of ugliness. And I look at the humble Austin Cambridge or even the Ford Anglia and think it a thing of beauty. Maybe it's just me. Wayne, thanks for the call. Please keep donating to keep the show going. Go to moats.tv/donate. You can put your debit or credit card in. Very much appreciated. Simon has donated via Super Chat £5. Thanks, Simon. Monkeypox, nah, he says. I'm doing the funky Gibbon instead. Tarif, haven't heard from him for a while. He's in New Orleans. Let's hear what he has to say on US politics. Tarif, what would you like to say?
I have 2 comments. Hopefully I get to my second one. My first one I like to say is this. This is not a comment. I like to say freak, jewelry, and science. That's the first thing I want to say. Now I'm going to get to my 2 comments. My first comment is this. We got all these anti-tank missiles and Stinger missiles circulating the world now. They're being sold for anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 per platform.
Yeah, on the dark web. They're there. I've seen them. Yes. I've now seen them on the dark web. Javelins at 30,000.
Yes, so we all know. My thing is this. I got a suspicion that something might happen from here to the November election, like a October surprise, like a false flag, something that might actually help out the deep state here in the United States, where you might have some crazy nuts that might be neo-Nazis, some Islamic nuts, fundamental nuts, might take those javelins and start taking down airliners, right? Which in turn, Britain, United States, and Britain and NATO will probably blame Iran or maybe North Korea, or maybe in Russia for doing it, and they're going to connect it to the mega movement, to the Trump movement, to where they can put more pressure on the people over here to impose some type of new surveillance state, or to limit access to the internet, or something where it will give more power to the deep state in the next coming months. I believe something is going to happen, because I don't see people in the DNC or deep state jumping ships. I don't see them ratting on each other, even though we know we're going to have a red wave over here. They're supposed to have a lot of investigation. It seems like they got an ace underneath the, it seems like the DNC, the deep state, have a ace underneath their sleeves. And I think something might happen. Let's hope and pray nothing do, and let's expose them for who they are. My second comment is this. Julian Assange, me, I'm a whistleblower, and for the other whistleblowers, this is what should happen. I know the big fish like Kamala Harris and Biden and on Obama, they fall up there, right? The small fish that works for them, I think information should be released on them now, to let the deep state know that we're not playing with them, and they're not untouchable. That, hey, by releasing this information, they'll let them know that we ain't playing. And also, you know, Julian Assange, the terrible stuff he going through in that prison, being messed with constantly, and me and myself being a whistleblower, I'm going through harassment. And I heard reports John Kiriakou and Snowden before he left, and other whistleblowers was going through hell for being activists, for standing up. Yeah. I think some information needs to be released on these small fish, just like they say in the Gulf water, you know, small fries. I think we got to mess with them small fries to let the big boys know, hey, we ain't playing no more. You know, if you're going to come after our finances, our minds, to mess with our families, to turn our families against us. I have family members turned against me, friends turned against me. I'm pretty sure they have other whistleblowers and activists that's in the United States and Britain and also Europe, that once they stood up, all crazy things start happening to them. Now it's our turn where we got to start releasing information on them now, on the like small fish.
Okay, Tarif. Well, you got a good run tonight. Thanks for that. Peter is in Warrington, in England, where I drove through just yesterday. Peter, welcome.
George, how are you?
By the grace of God, good. What would you like to say?
There's a word I've got for you. Have you heard of the word didicoi?
D-I-D-I-C-O-T. Does it mean bandit?
D-I-D-D-I-C-O-Y. And according to Collins Dictionary, it's one of a group of caravan-dwelling roadside people who are not true Roma. So the lady earlier was talking about travellers, and I just thought I'd give you that
word. Yes, about nomenclature. Yeah.
I thought I'd give you that word. Your callers earlier were talking...
Well, I'm grateful.
Your callers earlier were talking about Henry Kissinger, and my understanding is that he's no longer of this world. He's not 99, he's long gone. He's a criminal who's been prosecuted in Guantanamo Bay for crimes against humanity.
Yes. Now, how did you reach that understanding, Peter?
Well, it's out there on the internet. Now, is it correct? I think it probably is. I think there's been a huge number of prosecutions under military law in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And I suspect Tony Blair has been out there as well for war crimes. And he's been prosecuted in Guantanamo Bay also. And a number of other high-profile...
So are these body doubles that we see on television?
I think they are, yeah. I think we've talked about this before. There's some CGI going on, or they're recordings. So these people have been dealt with, and they've gone through the American military system in Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. And there are numerous people, and yet you guys aren't reporting on it, which is a shame, because I think you've got a duty to find this information out and report it to the people out there.
I can hear a band playing, Peter. It's playing Believe It If You Like. Thanks for your call. I'm going to do you the compliment of imagining that was all a wind-up. If it isn't, then you are on a weekend out from Ward 5. You get me? Let's hear from Kenny in Acton. Go ahead, Kenny, a legend.
Ding, ding, round 3. George, I sent you a super chat on Wednesday asking if you remember when I told the story of my Uncle Stephen losing his trousers that I phoned up. And you said you couldn't remember.
Yes, that's right. I don't know. Tell me, remind me.
I'll remind you. Can I take you? I'll take you for a walk down memory lane right now. Listen to this. But then I heard my mum coming down the stairs. And she...
I knew that was a hoax. I just knew that it had to be a hoax. Will we let him speak on? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
No, Kenny.
Yo.
Go on.
It's a true story.
You just burst out laughing. That's what put a question mark on it.
Right, well, listen.
I'm listening.
And when she opened the door, a man walked in, and it was my Uncle Stephen, in just his T-shirt, wife, and a pair of socks. He was demanding that my mum tell him where his trousers are. Where's my trousers? Where's my trousers? Mum says, okay, I don't know where your bloody trousers are. Kenneth, have you seen your Uncle Stephen's trousers? I went, no, but I'll go up the stair and get a pair of my deceased father's trousers, which were too small for him. So I came back down and I said, here, put them on. And he grabbed them out my hand and tried to put them. He said, these are bloody day. So he stood on the path in front of the door. But because the trousers were too small for him and too tight, he started hopping on one leg as he tried to get both legs into the pair of trousers. And he fell backwards and banged his head off the doorstep. And then he went out the gate. And because the trousers were too tight, both his thighs were stuck together. So he had to walk down the street from the knees down and with a bleeding head. There you are.
Well, that's a remarkable story. It's one of the worst Friday the 13th stories I've ever heard, but it entertained us.
Did you get that?
I did. Remarkable. You and I both sound more Scottish there back then than we do now. We've obviously been down south too long, Kenny.
George.
Kenny? Yeah, go on.
I've been teetotal for 11 years, so we're both teetotal as well. But we're on different sides of the football spectrum because I'm a jumbo. There you are, eh? And the last game I was at...
That's the worst stadium I've ever been in my entire puff. It's a stadium in which I endured more than 90 minutes of unrelenting sectarian abuse, once spotted sitting in the stand with Tosh McKinley's father, who used to play for you and then for Celtic. And for 95, 6, 7 minutes, it was F the Pope and it was F me and it was, I would never in my life, if you paid me, go to Tynecastle again. There you go, I've got to get that off my chest. Last word to you, Kenny.
Yeah, you get sectarianism in both Hearts, Hibs, Rangers, Celtic, but it's less pronounced in Edinburgh than it is in Glasgow. The last game I was actually at was...
Not in my experience, but anyway. We're boring the international audience.
Right. The last game I was at, Celtic beat us 7-0 in the Scottish Cup when we had a transfer embargo and Gary Locke was the manager. And I'm too traumatised to go back after that. Okay.
Have you got a song for me?
Okay.
We usually finish on a song with you,
Yeah,
Kenny.
I'll do a quick song.
Go on.
Right. Blue moon, blue moon, blue moon, keep on shining bright. Blue moon, keep on shining bright. You're gonna bring me back my baby tonight. Blue moon, keep on shining bright. I said, blue moon of Kentucky, keep on shining.
Kentucky, keep on riding.
Shine on the one that's gone and left me blue. Hello?
Yeah, what fabulous. That's from the Sun.
Cheers, man.
That's from the Sun Sessions. That was Elvis at his very best. Well, You weren't Elvis at his very best, but Elvis was at his very best in those
I've got 2 tickets
sessions.
to see the new Elvis film that's coming out. The tickets are for the release day on the 24th in Leicester Square.
I'll be there. I'll be there.
I'm going to take a woman, George.
I might even be at the premiere.
I'm going to take a woman, George.
I might even be at the premiere of the new Elvis movie, having been a child member of the Elvis Presley fan club, the official Elvis Presley fan club of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you, and if it was, come back next week at the same time, same place for the mother of all talk shows. You can go to my Patreon to see the new material, patreon.com/George Galloway. You can join me on Wednesday on YouTube for The Galloway Show. Join the growing audience there. Good night.